This programme examines violent civil disorder in the United Kingdom and abroad, and the police tactics in regaining control during a riot.
Oswald Mosley's Unionist rally in Trafalgar Square drew a crowd estimated at more than 5,000. The first, and as it turned out the only, audible speaker was greeted with a barrage of rotten fruit and coins. That was the beginning of a very abrupt end to the fascist meeting. The crowd, determined to wreck it, broke through the police cordon. Flashback to 1936 and a parade of Mosley's black shirts in the East End of London. As they marched through the streets, anti-fascist elements set about them, but the arm of the law went into action. The police were kept busy then, and they certainly were this time. It seems that in the interests of free speech, meetings of this kind are to be allowed to go on. But I must say my sympathies are still with the police. They're always on the spot.
Compared with other countries, rioting on the streets of mainland Britain has, thankfully, been a rare sight. Here, protesters against the Vietnam War clash with the authorities. In a riot, the ordinary men and women of our police force often have to cope with demands outside their normal duties, facing levels of hostility that can lead them to lose control.
Red mist is police slang for that psychological cocktail which is guaranteed to produce an overreaction. It refers to the sense of frustration, antagonism, us against them, we are being the good guys, they are the bad guys, and correspondingly a relative lack of control.
We saw it in the 60s in the Grosvenor Square anti-Vietnam demonstrations, where you get both people in the crowd and members of the police just quite literally running amok.
Dr. Peter Waddington and Professor Geoffrey Pearson are experts in the study of civil disorder.
In 1976, the Notting Hill Carnival ended in disorder, and the police had almost no methods of containing that apart from dustbin lids and milk bottle crates that they picked up off the street. As a result of that, they devised what became the Long Shield, or otherwise known as the Met Shield. and they inserted a reinforced lining to the ordinary police helmet and issued officers with goggles.
In a climate of inner-city depression and high unemployment, some of the people of Brixton showed their dissatisfaction by taking to the streets.
In 1980-1981 there were serious inner-city riots, and as a result of that we started to get the development of the crash helmet style of headgear with a proper visor. And also, because of the use of fire bombs, officers were equipped with a flame retardant overall, which they know in the slang as a baby grow, and padding was concealed beneath that.
Often seen as the instrument of government, the police bore the brunt of the crowd's hostility. Although some lessons have been learnt from previous riots, the police were caught out by the sheer scale of the violence and destruction to property. Despite these scenes, few could have anticipated what was to follow. During a widespread series of so-called copycat riots, Toxteth was the scene of unprecedented violence against the police. After several nights of war on the streets, emergency measures were rushed through by the Home Secretary and riot headgear was issued. At the height of the violence, a form of CS gas pellet was fired into the mob. It was the first and so far the only time this weapon has been deployed in mainland Britain and caused much controversy.
They're not designed for public order, and indeed it was alleged that a number of people were very seriously injured by the results of the use of that weapon on that occasion.
You could argue, in fact, that the British attitude is rather amateurish. The man who might one day be the home beat officer, going around having cups of tea, doing community policing, talking to old people's groups, the next day is wearing a riot uniform and is right in the forefront of discontent in modern Britain.
In understanding the tactics that are used in public order situations, you have to realise that the police took over this responsibility from the military, right up until the police were instituted, and for a good while after that, the military were there as the lethal long stop, and they inherited most of their tactics from the military. So the principal tactic of the baton charge is merely an adaptation by the police of the traditional military tactic of rout. You put your enemy to flight, and the police put a crowd to flight in much the same way. All officers receive what is called familiarisation training, which is a couple of days down at Riot City.
Riot City, a mock-up urban estate, rather like a film set, became the testing ground for new methods of containing civil disturbance. Fellow officers play the part of rioters, with frightening realism.
At the very top there are level 1 trained officers who are usually part of a specialist public order unit, territorial support group, special patrol group, tactical aid group. They're known by various titles in various forces, and they will be extensively trained in all manner of public order manoeuvres, and they will be refreshed very frequently, usually on a monthly basis. So those are, as it were, they form the riot squad and would do the most demanding and often the most aggressive manoeuvres.
The long shield not only resembles those used by the ancient Romans, but manoeuvres like this also date back to that time. Riot police are also trained in the use of plastic bullets. The gunners are brought forward concealed by the front ranks to provide the element of surprise. The baton round has never been used in mainland Britain. The miners' strike of the mid-80s was a test of resolve for the police. Caught in the midst of a bitter dispute between unions and government, the police's ability to maintain order became the focus of intense media attention.
Some outside forces were not actually welcomed by the hosting forces in the coalfields. It is reputed that Thames Valley Police were stopped at the border of Derbyshire by Derbyshire Police and told to go back home because they looked too aggressive. There were a number of different police forces deployed, and one of the forces had a habit of marching everywhere, very much as a sort of military squad, much to the derision and amusement not only of the striking miners, but also particularly of the Metropolitan Police officers who joined them in cheering and jeering as they marched past.
Ordinary uniformed officers were called to protect working miners from strikers. In a typical no-win situation, anger and frustration boiled over into violence and aggression.
Policing of public disorder is a virtual recipe for aggressive overreaction. Police officers are usually subject to attack and injury for some period before they start a dispersal operation. So they will be antagonised by the crowd. They will act in concert as a group, us against them. It isn't me as an individual constable hitting this particular individual. It is us as a police force.
Eventually, the tactic of using uniformed police and a softly approach had to make way for mounted riot police in the face of growing violence.
Steady.
At Handsworth, the rioters appeared better prepared for confrontation.
The principal weapons that have been used against police are usually ones that do come to hand, and so to some extent the most formidable is the ordinary missile. The half house brick can do a lot of damage. Where there is planning or some attempt to cohere as a group, you may get people who come along with various devices such as nails welded together to defeat police horses, and sometimes marbles and ball bearings perform the same function. More seriously up the scale, there are people who have sometimes been equipped with machetes, sometimes machetes attached to the end of scaffolding poles. Police officers in charge of a public order incident have the same motivation as any police officer, which is to maintain as much control over the operation as they possibly can. Once there is disorder, control is effectively lost. And so then the main aim is to disperse the crowd and to keep them from cohering together.
With improved protection and weaponry at their disposal, the Riot Police showed great restraint under fierce attack, but could do little to prevent parts of Handsworth being razed to the ground.
In any situation that flares up into a riot, there's enormous amount of stress, red heat, emotions running high, physical injury, etc. And perhaps no amount of training can completely immunise people against that.
The Riot Police adopted a non-interventionary approach. Nobody wanted to see a repeat of the clashes of 1981. Some of the most volatile situations which the Riot Police have to confront stem from football hooliganism.
When you have a dispersal, one of the great problems of dispersal is distinguishing those who are guilty from those who are innocent. A dispersal means what it says. It means that the street is cleared. And at that point, there is very little opportunity to make that distinction. Imagine a situation where officers are rushing down the street and some people say, I'm not a rioter, I'm out of play. And then the police go past accepting the good offices of this person. And then the person decides that maybe they are a rioter, and now they're going to start throwing bricks at the backs of the policeman.
If the early 80s really saw the birth of modern-day yob culture, then perhaps the latter part of the decade saw its export abroad. Although not always at fault, British football supporters have often clashed with rival fans and police forces alike. Continental Riot Police are often more aggressive in their handling of riots, and British fans have sometimes found their tactics far more severe than at home. In this particularly violent clash, German fans fired rockets at Dutch supporters.
In many countries of the world, they have a specialist riot squad, sometimes known as a so-called third force. For example, the French CRS.
French farmers demonstrate their views on the GATT trade agreement outside the Ministry of Agriculture. With an armed police force and dedicated riot police, the CRS, France has experienced surprisingly few fatalities as a result of civil disorder.
The problem with the dedicated riot squad is affording them. Most of the time they're not being used. And that has a number of consequences. First of all, they're relatively sparse in number and have to be deployed in particular locations. So the CRS, for example, are available in Paris and Lyon and Dijon and places like that, but they're probably not there in Clermont-Ferrand. So if there was a problem in Clermont-Ferrand, you'd have to wait for the CRS to arrive. The second corollary from having small numbers of dedicated riot police is that they have to compensate for manpower by firepower. So traditionally they are associated with very aggressive tactics and the use of formidable weaponry. And if you see the CRS at an ordinary demonstration, what you will see is a clearly veiled threat that if this gets out of hand, then we go from this quiescent state to a much more aggressive confrontation with the use of tear gas and so forth.
The emergence of the far right in Europe has led to violent confrontations between extremists and their opponents. At Solingen, the Riot Police turned the water cannon on neo-Nazi supporters, some of whom were armed with handguns. The rise of the far right in Britain has led to some equally disturbing confrontations. Waterloo railway station was the scene of clashes between the British National Party and the Anti-Nazi League. Outside the station, more ugly clashes took place as the police tried to separate the rival groups.
I really thought Harry is
The media can get to the scene of the trouble with increasing speed in their attempt to provide the public with vivid and immediate information. On occasion, TV crews can become the target of the mob's hostility.
Fuck off! No peace! No justice! No peace!
Following the verdict in the trial of the police officers filmed beating Rodney King, Los Angeles erupted into 3 days of rioting and looting, which left 44 dead and 1,900 injured. Damage to property was estimated at $550 million. As the nation watched on live television, truck driver Reginald Denny was brutally assaulted. For a time, the mob took control. The riot police were nowhere to be seen. Korean shopkeepers defended themselves against looters with handguns and machine pistols. Eventually, more than 6,000 armed police and National Guardsmen were deployed to restore order. Inspired by the god Lord Ram, displays of Hindu revivalism have led to forceful retaliation by the Indian authorities. Unarmed Hindus, shot and beaten by the police, are now seen as martyrs to their cause. Throughout the early 1990s, South Korean students protested against what they considered an undemocratic government. Concentrated mainly in the capital Seoul, clashes with riot police have been frequent and violent. Tear gas and live ammunition were used to deter rioters, who were sometimes deadly accurate with their petrol bombs.
Throughout recorded human history, there have been popular protests, crowd violence, riots. I can't actually envisage a society in which the crowd won't from time to time be a vehicle for certain kinds of popular protest.
A large-scale demonstration against the poll tax descended into violent clashes in the heart of London.
It is frequently the case in demonstrations, particularly pre-planned demonstrations, that very large numbers of officers are deployed. So that at the last anti-poll tax demonstration, there were over 5,000 police officers in Trafalgar Square. That made it, on its own, the 6th biggest police force in the country.
Confrontations developed between small groups of protesters and the police, who were placed in an impossible position. As the day wore on, 350 arrests were made, with innocent bystanders dragged into the fray. Police vehicles came under vicious attack.
Serious disorder had broken out on the south side of Trafalgar Square. The public order operation has its own radio network, but when that disorder broke out, a general broadcast was made pointing to officers in need of assistance. A British transport motor patrol in central London heard that broadcast, went evidently thinking that they were getting involved in a fairly minor fracas, and found themselves in the middle of a major riot. When they tried to extricate themselves from it, one of the rioters thrust a scaffolding pole through the driver's window, and had the driver not brought his head back, it almost certainly would have taken it off. Decision was taken to disperse at least part of the crowd up the Haymarket. I followed up the police there, and it was quite clear that everybody was being swept literally like a broom. And the major instruments of that, of course, are policemen on horses, police officers on horses. And there's no opportunity at all to distinguish when you're riding a horse that the person who's getting in your way is a good guy or a bad guy.
If you want to understand how a crowd just goes off the edge, how the police go off the edge, then all you have to reflect upon is that under the uniform, under the skin, the rioters and the police are caught in the same sort of psychological web because we're all human.
As evening fell, looting and destruction began in earnest. Parts of London's theatreland became impassable, and the well-off were singled out by the mob.
You can say that the poll tax riot went nowhere in terms of any political outcome, but that's typical. Historians taking the long view say that's a definition of a riot. It's how the crowd takes control, wrests control, if only for the day.